The Rhode Island Natural History Survey presents videos to showcase the animals, plants, geology, and natural systems that surround us, and the people and organizations working to understand and conserve them. Good evening. I'm David Gregg. This evening, we will be learning about bats. Mammologist Pete August, volunteering for the Watch Hill Conservancy, has been studying bats at a coastal site in Westerly, Rhode Island, Napatree Point. Pete made this video to show how scientists study bats in the field and to give us a glimpse into the seasonal patterns that are beginning to emerge from this research. So let's begin. Fall migrations, bats in the Napatree Point Conservation Area.
And I manage Napatree Point Conservation Area. Napatree is a really important coastscape, and we have lots of migrating species that come through this time of year. One of the things we monitor as part of our stewardship is bats. Let me introduce my colleague, Pete August. Dr. August, come tell us about your bat monitoring.
Janice, thank you. So we have a number of monitoring programs happening at Napatree, and one that we started about 4 years ago was monitoring bat activity and bat diversity 24/7. So we have an electronic instrument called a Peterson electronic bat detector, and I'll show you how everything gets set up. This is the microphone for the bat detector, and we elevate the microphone at our sampling site so that it sits right above the shrub canopy, and any bat flying within about 15 or 20 meters of the microphone will detect its echolocation call, and this wire connects to an electronic device that we keep in a waterproof box, and every one of those passing bat calls gets recorded on an SD card. We set this out in March before any bats are active, and in a good year we'll take it down in November following all the bat activity. So that's the mechanics of what we do. And what we have found is we have bat activity over the western end of Napatree, which is where we are now, all year round, but the activity is really quite modest. There's not a lot of bats, and the diversity is kind of standard of what we would see in Rhode Island. Big brown bats, every now and then a little brown bat, the species that's been having issues with white nose syndrome, and a group of bats we call the tree bats, the red bat, the hoary bat, and the silver-haired bat. The tree bats explode in their activity on Napatree in the fall, because the tree bats will summer here, eat their insects, and then migrate down to the southern states, Florida and Georgia, for the winter time. So they have a long trek just like our birds. And what we have found is very low activity most of the summer. Come September and October, a real surge in red bat, hoary bat, silver-haired bat activity passing over Napatree. And so we're hypothesizing that these bats are doing the same thing that many species of birds are doing, and that is hugging the coast on their trip south. And so in the next subsequent video clips in our little story on Napatree bat migration, I'll show you what the bat detector shows us, how we identify what species of bat has passed in front of the microphone, and I'll show you some data on seasonal activity of these bats over the course of the year. It's extremely interesting, and it's great fun because this is not happening in the day, and even when you're out here and the bats are passing by, you don't know it. And so the electronics have really created an exciting story. So stay tuned for part 2, and we'll be back in a second.
Hi, back again. This time we're in the laboratory, and let me take a moment to explain how the recordings of bat echolocation calls that I described out on Napatree get processed. So the bat calls are recorded on a large SD card inside the Peterson bat detector. The card can hold thousands and thousands of calls. Every month, we will go out, put in a clean card, take the filled card back to the lab, plug it into a computer, and download all the individual tape recordings onto a computer hard drive. And then using Sonobat software, the software will analyze each one of the recordings for its acoustical properties. And before you are a couple of examples of bat call recordings. And let me explain what you're looking at. These green blobs down here show the power or the strength of the sound at that moment. So here it's very strong. Here it's much weaker. The x-axis is time in milliseconds. The y-axis is frequency in kilohertz. Just as a point of reference, our hearing ends at around 12 to 15 kilohertz, right where my cursor is. This particular bat has a base frequency of about 20 kilohertz, and we see this little uptick for each call up to around 40 kilohertz. This species has a much higher frequency sound, beginning around 40 kilohertz, and less of an uptick. And so depending on the behavior and the species of the bat, we get these very different acoustical properties. Here are two other bat recordings. Notice this set of recordings goes from about 45 up to 95 kilohertz, very high frequency, very steeply rising in pitch. These are almost tonal, no change in frequency over here. So the software will take a bunch of mathematical measurements, the base frequency, the number of harmonics, the duration of each call, and take those data and make a statistical analysis against a reference data set of bat calls of known species, and assign an identification, which species of bat is making this call. And these statistically based quantitative comparisons are really quite accurate. It'll also give you a probability of correct. Some calls, because of background noise, are a little bit confused. Other calls like these are crystal clear, and the software can make a good determination. So the end result of this is for each one of the calls, the software will tell us what the species is. Let me show you a couple of spectrograms, these graphs that I just showed you, of passing bats in real time. I'll start with a big brown bat, and then we'll look at a hoary bat, and you can see the spectral properties and also hear the sounds the bat's making, but at a lower frequency. The software will divide the frequency by 10 so we can hear it with our ears. So a couple of recordings will be coming up next. So now you understand the process by which we acoustically monitor bat diversity and activity on Napatree. You've seen how we set up our microphone. You see what our bat detectors record for us and how we can use the acoustic properties of bat calls to identify the species of bats based on their echolocation calls. Where's all this taking us? This is the end game right here, this graph. This tells us something about the diversity of bats on Napatree over the course of the year and when activity is greatest. Let me explain. X-axis is week of the year. I would suggest looking up top where I provide the season by month, not week. We are presenting data for 4 different species of bats. These are the number of bat passes that we collected last year, 3,859 for the big brown bats, 61 for the red bats. The y-axis is the percent of the total number of bat passes that we obtain as the season progresses. And so look, let's dissect this curve. This black line are silver-haired bats. By early June, we have about 8 or 10% of the total number of silver-haired bats have been recorded in our bat detector. When the lines are flat, like the silver-haired bat here is, and the red bat's pretty flat too, as well as the hoary bat, that means there is very little new bat activity. But when the lines spike up, look, we're accumulating a large number of bat passes in a very short period of time. These steeply rising vertical ascents really showcase the high activity times of year. And so starting in the end of July, we're getting a real peak in hoary bat activity. We're getting a real peak in big brown bat activity. We get a climb in red bat activity. The bats are doing different things. By the end of August, our big brown bat activity has gone flat. No more new bat passes. Big brown bats hibernate locally. Big brown bats hibernate locally. They'll fly 20, 30 kilometers away from where they spend their summers and hole up in a building or something like that. The red bat, hoary bat, and silver-haired bats, they migrate a long distance. They'll head down to Georgia, Florida for the winter months where bats are abundant, or where bugs are abundant, and spend their winters down there and return to the Northeast in the summertime. So these are our migratory species. And look, the red bat is the last one passing through a continuous activity through September, surge of activity almost to October. Silver-haired bats, same kind of pattern. A lot of fall silver-haired bats flying overhead, whereas the hoary bats and the big browns have gone flat. So the results are the cohort of bats that we see are common for this area. Big brown bats are most common. Bat activity is pretty slow up until middle of July, and then we get a lot of bats flying around. Big brown bats are basically where they want to be in the end of August. Our migratory species, the red bats, silver-haired bats, are still moving through in the fall. They're doing like what many of the bird species do. They're following the coastline, possibly as a navigation cue, heading south, and Napatree is part of that migratory route for bats, as these data would indicate. So it's an interesting story, and we are pleased to be able to share this with you. The studies that I have described have been going on for the last couple of years by myself and Janice Sassy. You met Janice in the earlier video. She's a manager of the Napatree Point Conservation Area. Peter Payton at URI and Charlie Brown at DEM have been great advisors to us. on matters of bat biology as well as migratory bird ecology. Melissa Cody and Kevin Rogers have been helpful over the years in collecting the SD cards and checking the instrument. The nice video that you saw in the start of this was done by Peter Payton. And none of this would happen were it not for the generous support of the URI Coastal Institute and the Watch Hill Conservancy. So, hope you enjoyed this, and as quiet as you might think it is at nights these days, these fall days, the bats are flying by. It's a busy time of year for them.
Natural History Survey videos are made possible through the generous contributions of members and friends. Want to help us do more environmental science and conservation? Hit the like button, share our videos with your circle, subscribe, or make a financial contribution on our website, ranhs.org, or through Patreon. Thanks, and see you out there.